Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some cards using the new Happy Haunting collection. This here is the Woof or Treat die set. I absolutely love that little ghost dog. And this one here is Fiona the Dancing Witch. Now, I'm not a huge Halloween person, so there's more things in this collection. I am not going to be creating with them. I am using some other things from older collections instead. So I'm using that faux embroidered pumpkin. I'm using the Spiderweb press plate as well as this particular paper from Paper Roses. I loved how kind of spooky it looked. And then I'm going to do something fun with the ghost dog and that dragon die. Just get a little creative. I just saw something in this die when I first saw it and had to play around with it and see if it would work. So I pulled out my Platinum Scout, taped my paper to, or my dies to some cardstock scraps for my first card. This is one of my first times using the Platinum Scout. I love how it works and I love how compact it is. I'm still getting used to the size of the plates in comparison with the narrowness, but it cuts out just like the regular Platinum machine. So I love the fact that there is a smaller option, and really if you're filming and stuff like that, it fits better on the screen, so I like it for that as well. I'll be using my other one for my press plate things as well, so I'll be using that in this video also, but I just had to bring that one out. I had gotten it about a month ago and hadn't actually pulled it out of the box yet, so it was fun to get it out of the box and actually try it. So with all of my pieces die cut, I can start assembling everything. So I love the fact that the Woof or Treat die has that cute little pumpkin basket, and you can get really creative and do some fun colors with it. I chose to just do traditional colors. Now there's only a dog head, the nose, and the feet. So originally when I saw this die, I wasn't really looking at the pieces in the die. I just saw that it was a ghost sheet or whatever on a dog, and I thought, oh, that would be cute in vellum. But then when I went to go cut it out, I'm like, no, you can't, because you don't have the rest of the silhouette of the dog beneath it, so it would look a little bit odd. So I just have it cut out of some fog cardstock. It's a little bit of a really light gray, and I am going to be masking off the ears and the feet and doing a little bit of ink blending. I should have done it ahead of time, but when I started, I was not intending to do ink blending, and then halfway through, I just really wanted to. So a lot of these dies here have openings for the eyes. I just put a piece of cardstock scrap behind them just to fill in the color. Otherwise, you're going to see the background behind it. While that die cut is, or those dies, or that piece is drying, I'm going to work on my background. I'm going to use an interference ink pad. This one is Regal gray. So this one shows up gray on white cardstock and purple on black cardstock. So I'm using the Spiderweb background press plate, and I'm going to do it on some black mixed media heavy stock. And this, because it's the black background, you're going to see the purple. I'm also going to do one on some better pressed cardstock, and on that one you're going to see the gray. Now, because these areas are really, really fine, on the light background you're not going to see a whole lot of that interference. Some of the thicker areas where the little web pieces meet, you'll see just a touch, but not a whole lot, because there's not a lot of area for that light to reflect, so you're mostly just going to see gray. For this black background, though, you definitely see the purple. I am doing it a couple times just to kind of build that purple up a little bit and make those webs just a little bit more visible. I haven't tried it yet, but I think this web background would look absolutely stunning, foiled with a silver or the Prism Aura foil. I think it's going to look fantastic with that. So I am going to be playing with that at some point. I just don't do it in this video. So with this background done, and because I still have all my Better Press stuff out, I know I want to do another background with this. So I'm using the white Better Press cardstock, taping it down, and then using that same ink pad on here. And just like before, I am going to do this a couple times just to build that ink up and just to get a little tiny touch of that purple interference showing a little bit. Like I said, you don't see a whole lot of it anyways because of how fine those lines are. but when you build that ink up, you just see it just touch more. Now I have the gray matte inside my Better Press taped to the base, and that just helps it so it doesn't shift in any way. That way I can press the same plate multiple times, and as long as I haven't moved the plate, and in this case it's a really heavy plate so it'd be hard to move, it's going to press in exactly the same spot. Now for this one, I thought it would also be fun if there was a little bit of shine to that web, so I put on some clear embossing powder and heat set that. Now the one thing with embossing these very fine lines is it's very, very hard to see exactly where that embossing powder is. So it's hard to see whether it has embossed well. So I'm doing it slowly just to make sure that the places that do have the embossing powder do melt. Now the reason I said it that way is because these lines are so fine and they're pressed right into that cardstock that there are areas that that embossing powder doesn't stick to because it's pressed in. Those little grains of embossing powder can't get in there. So it's not completely embossed, but it does have some areas that are thicker, so they do have that shiny embossed look. I set that to the side because that's for the next card. For this one here, I wanted to have a black matte with that interference color on it. So I just cut a piece of my black cardstock down. My web piece is 4 inches by 5 1/4, and that black matte that I just put that Regal gray ink down on is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. I've been really into doing 8s lately. I'm not sure why, but at some point I'm probably going to be over it and stop doing it. So this is when I decided I wanted to have a little bit of that interference ink on the ghost dog. So I'm taking some pieces of Best Ever Craft tape and just taping off his ears as well as his feet. I didn't worry about the nose because I'm not ink blending the entire thing. I'm only just doing a light coat around the edges. I want to have just a tiny little bit of that gray with that purple interference color showing, because it's just going to coordinate really well and tie in really well with that background. Now, while I was doing this, because there are folds in the bottom part of that sheet, I decided to use that Best Ever Craft tape and just tape different areas on those lines just to get a little bit of that ink blending there to make it look a little bit more like a sheet that's folded, basically, just to kind of enhance those folds and wrinkles. Now, when you look at this, it looks gray, but when you tilt it in the light, you get a little bit of that purple mica showing, so it ties in beautifully with the background once it's put on there. Now, one thing I forgot when I was putting everything together is I forgot that the dog needed to be holding this pail, so I had glued down the nose completely, but fortunately it was easy enough to pull it up a little bit just to tuck that under there. Now with all of those pieces ready to go, I can start assembling my card. So I put down my mat there, and because that center piece is going to be covered, there was no need for inking the entire piece. I only need that outer edge there. And then I'm putting down the spiderweb piece. Now, you don't see it a lot on screen, but off screen, that looks really nice to have the spiderwebs with the purple and then the matte with that purple matching. I glued down my ghost dog to the center, and at that point I was trying to figure out what sentiments I had to work with these plates because I don't do a whole lot of Halloween stuff. And then I remembered that Spellbinders has a new release out. It's exclusive to their website, so I'm using the Halloween one, or rather the autumn one. This one's called All Seasons Autumn. It's a press plate and it has a coordinating die, and it just does sentiments for fall and Halloween. So it's absolutely perfect. There is a winter one, a spring one, as well as a summer one too. So I love the fact that there are special sets for this. It worked out perfectly. I'm going to be using a sentiment from this press plate on each of the cards today. So I'm doing all of the sentiments at once. This is what the press plate does, and then cutting them all at once. I always love when it does this because you can create a bunch of sentiments at the same time. I'm just using the regular Better Press cardstock here with the regular Better Press ink that comes with it. And because this cardstock is really thick, and I usually do my sentiments out of something thinner. It doesn't want to come out until I have it off or have the dye off of it. So this Trick or Treat one is going to work perfectly for this card here. So I have it, I'm just gluing it right to the bottom in that open spot. And here we have our finished card. I absolutely love that sentiment with it. It looks perfect with the little Woof or Treat dog, and I love that Spiderweb background as well. So now I'm working on my second card. I'm using that background that I created at the same time as the first one. I knew I wanted to do a little bit of ink blending on this one, so I'm using some Distress ink in Shaded Lilac, and then I'm going to use Black Soot as well. Then I'm going to use that same Regal Gray interference pad and add just a little bit of that interference around the outside edge. It's going to tie that spider web with the purple shine from that outer edge as well. And it just creates a really, really cool look for it. I'm not doing a ton of ink blending with that black. I just want a dark background, but I still want to see that purple color. Even though I'm not a Halloween creating person or Halloween person, I absolutely love the combination of the black with the purple and that like limey green with the orange. I love the combination of all of those together. So all of my cards have kind of a version of that color combination, if not just the purple and the black, because I absolutely love that as well. But that orange and or the green with it just has a really nice bright pop of color. So with this background done, I'm just going to assemble my card base and have that sitting aside to dry while I'm working on assembling all of my die cuts. For this one, I'm just using a black mat, putting that on a white card base, and then adding that spider web piece. So my black mat there is cut down to 5 3/8 by 4 1/8. My spider web piece here is 4 inches by 5 1/4. So once again, we've got 1/8 of an inch difference here. So this Fiona the Dancin Witch die is one of the dies that the legs swing and it makes her look like she's dancing. Now what I was just showing the screen there is you can't see it really well until you see it personally, but the bottom of her dress has a little bit of a spider web design, so it's going to blend in beautifully with that spider web background. In order to bring that out just a little bit more, as well as add highlights to the hat and the shoes, I'm using a little bit of that Regal Gray interference pad, just going on the hem of the dress as well as the edges of the sleeves. For the hat, I just did the bottom rim as well as the top, and then for the shoes, I just did a tiny little bit at the bottom, just to get a little bit of that purple mica showing, adding just some shine to her clothes. For the legs, I die cut them out of Peridot cardstock, and then I'm gluing on the purple accents. These are done with Purple Mist. These are all done out of Spellbinders cardstock. For her face, I die cut it out of Barely Peach cardstock, and then I'm using some black cardstock to go behind her eyes, and then pink sand cardstock scraps to go behind her little rosy cheeks there. And this is exactly the same as the Ghost Dog one. It just glues right behind there. Because this is being glued, or the back of this is going right to the card, no one is ever going to see what this back looks like. So it doesn't need to look very pretty. It just needs to not go outside the lines or outside the edges of her face. So I just put a little bit of liquid glue, and I'm gluing everything with Barely Art glue in my fine tip bottle. The only thing that's not being glued down with this is the swinging mechanism and then the upper body of the witch. They need to be done on foam pop dots. The swinging mechanism swings on a foam pop dot, and then you need the rest of her body raised to match that level. As each of these pieces are glued together and dried, I put them underneath, or are drying, I put them underneath a large stamping block. It just holds everything flat. It means that I can keep working on the next area. I don't need to stop and hold something while it's drying. I find it really, really handy, and I have a ton of these blocks, so I just have the larger ones close by to be able to use for this. One thing that I did in error here is I glued the bottom part to the hat, and I glued the entire rim down. I should have only glued the 2 outside tips so that this would be easier to put on her head. It hadn't completely set, so it was easy enough to lift that part up to put it on her head, but it's always nice to know those things ahead of time. And really, it's something that I should have known. I just wasn't thinking when I was putting it together. You can see how easy she comes together. It's really easy to know exactly where everything goes. And if you ever run into a problem, you just look at the front packaging. And because it always has a picture on it, again, it's very easy to know where all those pieces go. The tiny pieces, I find reverse tweezers come in very handy for holding those pieces. It keeps it nice and secure while you're switching the tweezers from hand to hand. This is where I realized that I should have had that hat not glued securely for the entire rim, but like you can see, it comes together or comes off apart really, really easily. Now, with her body completely done, we can start gluing together her broom. So I did the broom handle out of the same black cardstock as her clothes. And then I did the straw part of the broom with some beeswax cardstock. There's also a few buckles that get put on the shoes as well as the hat. Those are done out of brushed silver cardstock. It's just one of the silver cardstocks in the treasured cardstock packs that Spellbinders has released. It's a pack that has 15 sheets of cardstock, 5 different finishes. So there's a silver, there's a gold, and there's a rose gold, and 3 sheets of each one of those finishes. So I find it coming in really handy for doing holiday cards. Now this is the swinging mechanism, the little hole at the top of her legs. You want to make sure that you have a foam dot that is smaller than that hole. And I always put it on, and I like to test to make sure that it swings nice and freely. And then you can put the foam pop dots on the rest of the body. Now I did end up putting some foam pop dots a little bit too low. So when I went to glue this on the card, they went right on top of the green circle part on top of that foam pop dot. So you'll see me lifting up her skirt and removing them. When I was putting them down, I knew that I needed to make sure that they were away from that mechanism, but I did end up putting them a little bit too low. So if you happen to put your piece down and your mechanism doesn't swing anymore, that's likely the problem, because you can see once I removed those pop dots and glued it down again, they swung freely. So it's always a good idea for things like this to test those mechanisms as you are working on your card, just to make sure that everything is working properly as you're going. So for her broom, I put a couple foam pop dots on the bottom part. My pop dots are too small or too big to put on the handle, so I just glued it to her hand, and the rest of it is hanging freely. And then I used the Spooky Fun sentiment from the All Seasons Autumn press plate sentiment set. So I absolutely love how cute she looks and the little swinging legs. I think it's adorable. So this is the cardstock from the Paper Roses Inky Color Pad. I did a video where I just did cards using this background, these papers, but this particular one I tucked aside right away because it looked kind of spooky and Halloween to me. It looked like trees with a little bit of a foggy mist, and I just loved that purple color, so I knew it would be perfect for a Halloween card. And this is the card where I'm pulling or bringing in the faux embroidered pumpkin die. This is from the Nicole's Needlework collection, and I did a video using this with the other parts of that collection. I just thought it would be absolutely cute for Halloween. I love the fact that there was a witch's hat. The pumpkin is perfect on that kind of spooky background. And so I cut one out of persimmon cardstock, I cut one out of beeswax cardstock, and then one out of Barely Peach cardstock. And I'm using 3 Cloud9 interference inks to add a little bit of mica ink blending to the outside. Now, because these are colored cardstocks, you're not going to see the pure color that you would on the white cardstock. Because that's a dye part of the ink, it will still show the color of cardstock that you're ink blending on, but you will get that shimmer from the mica. So I'm using the pumpkin spice one on the orange pumpkin as well as the Barely Peach pumpkin. I used the ripe mango on the yellow pumpkin, and then I used that Regal gray on the witch's hat. Now I did a little bit of the ripe pumpkin on the Peridot cardstock that I used for the pumpkin stems, just to give that a tiny little bit of shimmer as well. And once again, it does change the color of that a little bit because that ripe pumpkin, it's kind of a yellowy orange color. And because that is dye-based ink, it's a little bit transparent. So it shows, or it colors or changes the color of the Peridot cardstock just a little bit. I knew that was going to happen, and I just like how it makes everything coordinate really, really well together. So I glued that stem onto the top of the pumpkins, put that acrylic block on there to hold it, and then I'm gluing the band and the buckle on the witch's hat. Then I can start assembling my pumpkins onto my card. Now that witch's hat has a little slot in the brim, which makes it really easy to insert that pumpkin there. Just add a tiny little bit of glue. I decided to glue my clusters or glue my pumpkins, or put glue on the back of my pumpkins so that they were all ready to go and I could just kind of arrange them on my card all at once. I'm going to arrange them towards the bottom left side of the card so that I have a large area of that background showing, and I can put my sentiment on the top right corner. I think that witch's hat looks absolutely adorable on that pumpkin, and I'm glad that I grabbed that one and did it. This faux embroidered pumpkin die set has some leaf die cuts that I have die cut out of some fall colors or coordinating colors. It also has some little flowers. I chose not to do that on this card. I used them on my last card using this die set, so if you want to see them used, you can look at that video. I'll link it at the end of this one, and you can see that being used, those little flowers being used on there, as well as the rest of the collection. I think it would have been a good addition to this card, but I didn't want to add too much to it because I really wanted that background to kind of shine as well. But I also wanted my pumpkins to be a nice contrast to that background so that they didn't get lost on there. So in order to coordinate the pumpkins and that background, I die cut those leaves out of that beeswax cardstock, the Peridot cardstock, as well as some purple mist cardstock, which is just a light purple. Just going to tie all of that in together. I didn't die cut any out of the persimmon, which is the orange color, but you could easily add that to it as well and tie that in as well. I didn't do it because that was the main pumpkin that those leaves were going to sit at the base of, and I didn't really want my leaves to coordinate with those pumpkins. So I just used a little bit again of that Barely Art glue to glue those pumpkins down. These are really quite tiny, so you might find it helpful to use the reverse tweezers to place them. For most of them, I just put the glue on the back of the leaf and then just placed it where I wanted it to go. Now this leaf die cut 6 leaves at one time, and I just did one batch of the purple, one batch of the green, and one batch of the yellow. If you wanted that to be a lot fuller, you could use more than I used, or you could incorporate the little flowers that come with the die set, and that would definitely fill it up a lot quicker because they are definitely bigger than the leaves. And once you have as many or as few leaves as you want, you can assemble or you can add your sentiment to it. Now, again, I didn't use a ton of leaves here. You could easily use a lot more, or you could incorporate other leaves from other die sets as well. These ones are really quite tiny, and I think they're meant to be leaves to go behind the flowers from the die set, but I didn't want to use the flowers. I just wanted to use the leaves here. So I actually really like how it looks. It still keeps the focus on the cluster of pumpkins there. Now I left the pumpkins as they were. If you wanted to change the shape of them a little bit, you could use some scissors and cut down some of the lines that are created when you do some die cutting. Again, I left them as they were, but that is an option if you wanted to change the shape of them a little bit. So I just added that sentiment to the top right corner. This sentiment says pick of the patch, which I thought was absolutely perfect with those pumpkins. And I love those pumpkins popping off of the background made of that inky color paper. Now here is the card where I got a little bit creative. When I was looking at the pieces for the Woof Retreat, the Ghost Dog die set, I looked at the piece for the head and I swore it was a bat head, and I thought I had the wrong piece in there. And that's what brought this idea, or sparked this idea. So I die cut the bat head out of graphite cardstock, and the little pieces for the ears and the nose are done out of pink sand cardstock. I'm going to do orange for my background, so I'm using some cardstock scraps that are orange for behind the eyes to kind of tie that all in. The little wing pieces are from that Dancin dragon die set. It's actually called a Dancin birthday dragon, but it works perfect for this. I die cut the wings out of that inky purple cardstock or inky color cardstock that was left from the last card. Because of the way the color was on it, I just thought it kind of looked like it would be cool for the bat wings. You don't get a ton of the detail to it. The veins part, or whatever those are from The wings are cut out of the same graphite cardstock as the bat head, and I'm using some Regal gray ink to do a tiny little bit of ink blending just to get that purple interference on there. And I'm using my Altenew sticky mat for all of my ink blending. I find it so handy for grabbing those cardstock pieces, and most of the time I don't have any issues with my cardstock pieces moving around, so I really like how sticky it is and how it grabs it, but the cardstock pieces are still really easy to get off without bending them. So once I have them ink blended a little bit, I can set that aside to dry. For my spiderweb piece as well as my matte piece, I cut them down quite a bit because that bat isn't going to be very big. I didn't want a whole lot of space there. So I cut my black piece here down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and my spiderweb piece here I cut down to 3.5 inches by 4 3/4 inches. So I'm going to get a lot bigger white rim around the outside from the card base, but it just gives a lot less open space when I put my bat on here. For ink blending my background here, I'm using that pumpkin spice interference ink. Now, because we have a white background here, it is going to show orange, but where the ink is heavier around the edges of the cardstock and you tilt it in the light, you get a little bit of that purple interference there. I used that same Regal gray for this background. So this one was done the same as my second background. Only difference is I didn't emboss this one. I knew what I was going to do for the background, so I knew I wasn't going to need to have any of the resist from the embossing, and I really wanted the focus to be on the bat. For the bottom part of this, I'm using that Regal gray, so we're going to get more of a gray color, but both of these, the interference is purple to it, so we're going to have a little shimmer of purple on the outside edges for all of them. So for that orange, I did the top 2/3 of the cardstock, and for the gray, I'm going up 2/3 from the bottom. So we're getting a little bit of a blend in the center. Gray and orange don't make a fabulous color though, so I'm not doing a ton of that blending in the center. And at this point, I wasn't sure if I wanted the orange on the top or the bottom, but I am going to keep it on the top. And I kind of start to assemble my card. However, I did decide that I wanted to have purple on my mat here, so I'm using that Regal gray pad to just add that to the edges of this cardstock. I'll let that dry for a few minutes and then I will start assembling my card. Now, I could have used the pumpkin spice to do that color on the mat. Both of them have the purple interference, so it didn't really matter which one I chose. The Regal gray was the one that was closest to my hand at the moment, which is why I chose it. So I'm going to use that same Barely Art glue to glue everything down, and you can see how the border, the white border on this is a lot wider than it is on any of the other cards. Now, I'm going to glue on the little wings to the bat. I wish the wings were a little bit better. Not better, bigger when I was looking for options. This is the first die set, the Dancin Birthday Dragon was the first die set that came to mind because I've been trying to resist buying it for months. And it was a good excuse to buy it. In my head, I thought the wings were going to be bigger. I still love them. I think that die or the bat is absolutely adorable. I do wish the wings were just a tiny little bit better. Now, because he's rather small, I still kept him as one because I wanted him to be the focus, but you could easily do a couple and have a few little bats flying as well. And you could just reposition or have their wings at different positions just to give a little bit of variety. I did glue on my sentiment and then decided that I wanted it to be more of the orange color, so I just lightly did some ink blending with the orange. It's not perfect ink blending in any way, shape, or form, but I didn't want a chance getting some of that orange on that background. So here we have 4 fall Halloween cards. I absolutely love the final result of them, and I love all the little interference accents on each one of them. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have a fantastic day.